Welcome everybody to video number 1 of my series on the history of the calculator watch. Yes, these amazing little devices, I have been wearing them since I was a child, wearing, collecting, fixing. I have over 100 calculator watches in my collection, and I wanted to do a bit of a history. And you know, the internet, it is a repository for ever more obscure video subjects, and that's what brings us to the history of the calculator watch. So, as I said, this is the first of 3 series. This first video will be covering the early series, the golden age of the calculator watch when they first appeared in the mid-70s through to the early 80s. The second will be the Casio age. Casio went all in with calculator watches. Here's my first Casio calculator watch on my wrist here. They made hundreds of different varieties, really fascinating stuff. And that will cover sort of the 80s through to the 90s. And then the third video will be the crazy time of calculator watches, where it became more of a fashion icon than a useful tool. I'll also give you some recommendations on buying your own calculator watch if you want. If you think you're as cool as, say, Heath Ledger, or Sting, or Ryan Gosling, or Michael J. Fox, and want to have your own calculator watch, I'll give you some recommendations in the third video as well. But today's video is about the early stages of the calculator watch. To really appreciate these amazing devices, you have to put your mind in that time period. 1975 was when the first calculator watch came out. And 1975 was not like today. You didn't have a tablet, people didn't have laptops. In fact, people didn't even have a single home computer in their house. If you think about it, the most popular early home computer was perhaps the Commodore 64. That didn't come out until 1982. Yes, 1975. The most technology a family would likely have in their home would be, say, a small analog television or an AM/FM radio. Very few people had a digital watch. In fact, the first digital watch made by Pulsar only came out the year before. And very few people had a home calculator, let alone a computer. So to integrate both a digital watch and a calculator on a watch was just stuff of science fiction. Yes, most calculating done back then was done with a pad and paper, or a thing called an adelator, which was this little metal device where you put your pen in, if you wanted to add 6 times 7, you'd drag the 6 down, and then you'd find 7, and you'd drag that down, and up the top you'd see 13. It was a very basic mechanical device. My father actually had one back in the day. And just to give you a feel for 1975 technology, a popular conspiracy theory of the day was that the government was manipulating people's minds by using FM radio stations. So don't tune in using the new FM, stick to AM. Yes, a bit like 5G of today. So yes, the first ever calculator watch is often quoted as being this, the Pulsar time machine, which it was not. There was actually 2 watches before this watch, and the first one was called the Caldron, which was a 9-digit LED display, not an LC display, though, so they lit up. And this was truly an amazing watch. It was a scientific calculator watch. It was released in April 1975. And it sold very poorly, and there's a good reason for that. Firstly, the price. It was $600 in 1975, which is about $3,000 in today's money. So $3,000 for a calculator watch was a lot, but the real barrier that stopped these from selling, I think, was that they were marketed in the back of magazines as clip-out products, that is, alongside other products like the skate bike or how to be a ninja. So you had to clip out a docket, send away a check, and get back this device. Now, that might have been possible if you were rich enough to own one, but it was a real leap of faith, you have to understand. It was like internet spam ads of today. Say there was a spam ad that came up on your computer saying, for $3,000, we'll send you a time machine. You'd be a little hesitant, because that's exactly what they were doing here. It was real science fiction. No one had ever seen a digital calculator on a watch before, so it was a real leap of faith to spend that much money, send it away, and hope to get something back. No wonder they didn't sell very many of them. However, they sold enough of them that they made a follow-up watch the next year, which actually had a few more features. It was a little more reliable, and it had a solar panel on the side. A very rare watch even today. I've never actually seen one. I would love to collect one. If you have one, please let me know. The second calculator watch, same year, just a few months later, in June 1975, was released by a New York electronics company called Uranus. And this was a little bit more popular. It was also a very unique style of watch. It had only 6 digits, also LED, so very short battery life, but it sold a little better, even though it was a lot more expensive. At $900 1975 money, which is about $5,000 today. That is a lot of money back then for a product that no one had ever seen. But they marketed them a little bit better in more reputable magazines like Playboy, so more people purchased them. They are still extremely rare today, but they are out there, and they are a really great watch. Finally, we get on to the first really popular calculator watch. Yes, the Pulsar time computer, released in December 1975, but not actually in the stores until April the following year. So really a 1976 watch. But Pulsar did the right thing by selling these in jewelry shops. So people could actually walk into a jewelry shop, have a look, play with it, and go, wow, this is amazing. The first 100 models of these were actually made of pure 18 karat gold, solid gold, and they were sold for an eye-watering $4,000 in 1976 money, which is about $24,000 today. So that is an enormous amount of money. Occasionally the full gold ones come up for sale. They're anywhere between $2,000 and $4,000 depending on the condition. But the really common ones are these stainless steel silver ones. They were a little more reasonably priced back in the day at $500. And as I said, because you could actually get your hands on one in a jewelry store, they sold a lot of them. In fact, they made over 10,000 of these, and these are pretty common to find today. In fact, if you go on any eBay search, you can look for Pulsar time computer, and there'll be 2 or 3 for sale, and you generally tend to spend between $800 to $1,200 depending on condition. A lot of them don't work, and the ones that do are a little finicky to use. Certainly all the buttons are recessed. You need to use the special stylus that came with the watch in order to press the buttons. But yes, the first successful calculator watch, and I'd imagine in 1976, if you were walking around with one of these on your wrist, you were, wow, you were really either a super nerd or you were well ahead of your time. Very cool watch indeed. Interestingly, while Pulsar were the first watch manufacturer to make a digital watch and the first to make a successful calculator watch, this was the last calculator watch that Pulsar ever made. There were other Pulsar branded calculator watches further down the line, but they were actually Seiko watches with just rebranding on them. So this was the first and the last, a very successful calculator watch, 1976. Also in 1976, Hughes Aircraft Corporation, of all companies, decided they would release a calculator watch, a very chunky bit of metal this thing was. It was unique in the fact that it had 8 digits, the first for a calculator watch, and really the standard that continued on throughout the 80s and 90s. It was also a big success, mostly because it was featured in the sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica, which was in the late 70s as well. Some of the characters there also wore this watch, and people were, wow, where do I get one of those? The other reason they were successful is they were half the price of the Pulsar. So $250 or around $1,300 in today's money. A lot more affordable, so people would pick them up, and so they're still reasonably common today. You would expect to pay between $500 and $800 for one on eBay today if you find one in reasonable condition. Next was a very interesting calculator watch from Sinclair. Sinclair was an electronics company that made radios and stereos and went on to make computers and so forth in the 1980s. They had some innovative ideas, and one of them was producing a very cheap calculator watch. And they produced one that was so cheap, maybe a little too cheap. It was about 18 pounds or $20 in 1977. However, there were 2 flaws with this watch. First of all, it wasn't even a watch. It was just a calculator on your wrist. So strictly speaking, not a true calculator watch, but still a calculator on your wrist. So I'm including it in this video. And secondly, you had to build it yourself. And therein lies the shortfall with this watch, was that I don't know of anyone that successfully managed to put one of these together and for it to continue working. However, the price point was amazing for the time. Amazing. So they did sell quite a few of them, and they are still in circulation here and there. One of my friends who sent me this photo has got one. You really had to be a very experienced electronics engineer in order to solder one of these together and to actually get it to work. But its claim to fame, once again, the price, amazing for the time, $20. Also in 1977 was perhaps one of the most famous calculator watches of all time. Hewlett Packard, the computer calculator company, joined the market with their HP-01. This was a remarkable watch and really has justified me doing a whole other video just on this watch, how it can do time computing and all these other things. It just did things completely different than other watches then and today. Very similar to a lot of their financial calculators. They just do things differently. This watch did things differently, and they made a lot of them. More than 10,000 of them were produced, and they sold pretty well. The pricing started at about $600, but quickly decreased over the next couple of years as they tried to get rid of the stock. And in the end, they were giving them away to HP engineers within the company. Like almost half of the 10,000 produced were just given away to employees. So a lot of the watches you see on sale on eBay today, one owners, because they were somebody that worked for HP back in the late 70s, got a free watch, never unpacked it, and so you can get really great, high quality, never used HP ones still today. There's so many unique features. I don't have time to go over them in this video, but I will get one of these watches and make a separate video one day. And one of the unique features is the calendar on the HP one will work right through to 2177, which just shows the forethought of the HP engineers at the time. They really expected this watch to be used for a very long time. Jumping back to 1976, and we're going to look at Citizen. Citizen, who were a giant watch manufacturer at the time, jumped into the technology sector and decided it's time that they had a calculator watch as well. They were unique in a lot of ways. Firstly, they lacked a stopwatch or an alarm, and they had the buttons arranged around the bezel. They were also really two separate devices in one. That is, the watch module and the calculator module are two separate modules. So sometimes you can find these on the used market where one, either the watch works but the calculator doesn't, or vice versa. Just be aware of that. And they were made in three separate models, released 76, 77, 78, with the 76 model being the most basic model. The 77 model, the one I've got here, has more functions like memory and so forth. And then finally the 78 model, which is the granddaddy, one of the most sought after calculator watches even today, the Citizen Scientific Calculator watch. And what's great about this watch is that it has the most buttons crammed around the bezel that you could possibly get. 41 buttons crammed around that bezel, also in gold. I think only 200 were made, so super rare even today. They'd still come up for sale every now and then. One of these more popular models you could buy for $500 to $1,000, but for the gold scientific calculator model, you can expect to pay between $2,000 to $5,000 depending on its condition. So keep your eye out for the Citizen Gold Scientific Calculator watch. It's worth a lot of money if you find one in your grandpa's lower sock drawer. A year later in 1979, Citizen dropped the round bezel models, which were very finicky to use, and replaced it with this rather elegant model, I think, which finally added a stopwatch and alarm. Now, what's interesting about this model is that you can't use both functions. That is, you have to pick whether you want to use a stopwatch or whether you want to use an alarm. They must have figured to have a calculator, a watch, an alarm and a stopwatch was just too much power for one person to have. So yeah, they restricted the feature set to one or the other, bizarrely. But otherwise, I think really a lovely looking watch. And of course, also LCD with a long battery life. These are also reasonably easy to find. You generally pay $500 or above for one of these in a good condition as well. Around the same time, June 1977, the other big Japanese watch manufacturer jumped in on the calculator bandwagon with this watch. Also with LCD, long battery life, had a lot of calculator functions for the day, easy to use with the buttons on the front, sort of the style we came to expect from that point on. They set the standard. But what was interesting about this watch was that they sort of looked at it as, how do we adjust the time? And up till then, of course, watches were hand watches with the bezel you pull out and you change the time like this. So they decided to do the same thing with this watch. It has a bezel you pull out to change the time. Very cool. It was unfortunately missing the stopwatch and alarm as well, but it did set the standard for those buttons on the front. A very nice watch. And at the time, the cheapest calculator watch you could buy at $150, which is about $750 today. So really bringing down the price with these models. The following year in 1978, Seiko brought out this very stylish model called the Checkmate. And this added an alarm at last and shrunk the buttons down to such a small size. In fact, I think this is the calculator watch with the smallest buttons that was ever been made. Almost impossible to use, even with a stylus, but very clear display and a lovely looking watch. Just unfortunately impossible to use. In 1979, Seiko released another calculator watch, but actually branded them under their sub-brands of Pulsar, which they now owned, and Alba, which they also owned. They were known as the Y739. No buttons on the side for once, all buttons on the front. The buttons were a little larger, and of course this one had an alarm, also very popular, and also bringing down that price point to about $80 at this point. So these have remained very popular watches both then and today. In fact, the Alba model you can still buy brand new from time to time, once again on eBay. I really love these watches. They're very elegant. They're just a little difficult to use because of the size of the buttons. The following year, in late 1980, possibly early 81, Seiko released what is really considered the smallest calculator watch of all time. It was an absolutely tiny watch and quite rare today to find one working. It had a lot of problems with the buttons falling off. You know, if you're buying one of these, be very, very careful that it's actually in working order. So many of them sold on eBay are expensive and don't work. But yes, if you want the smallest ever calculator watch, this Seiko was the one. The final Seiko watch was a surprise hit. This one, the 515 or C515, was a very chunky industrial looking calculator watch which had a number of unique features. Now this is a 1982 watch, so keep in mind that by this point Casio had entered the market with their very, very cheap watches. However, this watch in 1982 had a few features that the Casio watches didn't have. Most notably, a very solid look and feel, and the buttons are actually huge. Just like I've been talking about small buttons, Seiko went the other way with this watch, and it was a surprise hit because of it. The buttons were actually easy to use. They're big buttons. They sort of feel like a HP calculator of the time, and the display was nice to read. It had a multiple memory function, easy to use stopwatch and alarm, and despite the fact that it was almost twice as much as the Casio watches of the time, at about $140 back in 1982. These sold very, very well because of how robust they were and how easy to use they were. And there was also a limited edition blackface one. The buttons around the bezels are all black. You can pay up to $1,000 for the limited edition one. I am wearing one of these today on my wrist. As you can see, I've got multiple of these watches because I love them so much. Yeah, I just love the style, the ease of use, the big buttons. It's a true representation of the time and one of the best calculator watches ever made. At the same time, Seiko also produced this horrible watch here, which is the same internals as the 515, but in a Pulsar external, and the buttons are a little smaller and a little more fiddly. Exactly the same functions, and they released it at a lower price point, about $20 cheaper, but these did not sell. Sometimes you've got to marry both form and function to get these things right. So yeah, that's the Pulsar version of this watch, the 515. 2 years later, in 1984, Seiko released what is undoubtedly the most remarkable watch of the time. It's this thing here, the UC2000. Now, strictly speaking, once again, not a calculator watch because you can't perform calculations with just the watch. You have to have the keyboard with it. But yeah, this was a data bank watch with a full keyboard, and young Nick Murray would have given a testicle to have one of these. This, yeah, you could even play little games on it. You could put all your addresses in it. Not that it had a big memory. There was a model later on that had a larger memory. But yeah, telephone numbers, addresses, data bank based type functions, plus calculator functions. It could do it all. Remarkable for 1984. This watch was the way to go. So yeah, you put the watch on a little holder here, and it communicates wirelessly to the watch. And you can do whatever functions you like and then use the watch on its own and be able to flip through the features or any programs you have on there. Yeah, just for 1984, this was space age stuff. I know today with our modern smartwatches, it does all these things and more. We're talking about 4 decades ago. This was truly a remarkable piece of technology. So yes, that is the part 1 of my history of calculator watches. As I said, the next part will be all about Casios, my favorite time of calculator watches. We've got a lot to cover there. And the third video will be all about the crazy watches that happened later on that were more around fashion as opposed to function, and what you can still buy in calculator watches today. So yes, thank you for watching my part 1 on the history of calculator watches. Please do leave any questions in the messages below, and if you own any of these watches, please also let me know. I'm also interested to hear from other collectors. There's only a handful of us around the world, but we are passionate about calculator watches for good reason. They are amazing devices. Anyway, we'll see you in part 2 coming up soon. Bye then. And finally, a quick shout out to my friend Nick, yes, another Nick, who runs the Instagram account Calculator Watch Chile, who helped me with a bunch of content for this video. Check out his Instagram account, amazing. He has pretty much every calculator watch, just an incredible collection. Follow him on Instagram and you'll see everything calculator watch. Anyway, thanks Nick. I'll see you guys in the next video.